So everyone is watching Pierre Poilievre. But you know what? They're looking at the wrong guy. There's a Trojan Horse inside Canadian Parliament, someone forged in the same fire as JD Vance who smiles like a moderate but votes like a MAGA Republican. His name is Jamil Jivani, and if you think you know him, you're wrong.
Today, we're pulling back the curtain on one of the fastest rising MPs in the Conservative Party and the gap between what he says in public and what he does in Parliament.
Because speeches are performance, votes are the truth, and his truth says a lot about where the Conservative Party is heading.
So buckle up, everyone. We're talking JD Vance, campus tours, Christian nationalism, school food programs, foreign aid, and why all of this suddenly matters a whole lot more than anyone expected.
So let's start with the moment that really floored me this week. Jamil Jivani goes on CBC, publicly, proudly, and says he could use his friendship with JD Vance to help Canada with tariffs.
Help? Help how? The United States has slapped Canada with some of the most aggressive tariffs we've seen in years. Trump has called us a vassal state. JD Vance is cheering it on. And Jivani wants us to believe he's got a hotline to change their minds.
It's like saying, don't worry everyone, that's my buddy who set the building on fire, and he's holding the hose too.
Exactly. And people need to understand who JD Vance actually is. He's not some neutral diplomat. This is the guy who talks openly about reshaping America into a religious project, who attacks allies, who supports Trump's threats towards Canada, and who treats our sovereignty like it's an inconvenience.
And Jivani is there saying, hey, I know him. I can put in a good word. A good word about what? Canada surrendering?
Because let's be honest, Dave, if you admire JD Vance, you're not exactly losing sleep over Canada's independence. You're probably nodding along to the 51st state talk. And that's the part that should make every Canadian nervous.
Jivani isn't just connected to JD Vance, he aligns with him. And that's the real story. And that alignment shows up everywhere in his politics. The hostility toward DEI, the Christian identity push, the cuts to social programs, the imported campus activism.
And here's the deeper concern. When somebody inside our own parliament starts seeing American conservative power as an ally instead of a threat, that's how you end up with Maple MAGA, the Canadian version of the same ideology, just different scenery.
And this isn't just about tariffs.
Right. Later in the video, we're going to show you specific campus strategies he's importing from the US and why he's targeting young men specifically.
But first, we need to talk about the 51st state rhetoric. Because if you look at Trump's rhetoric, saying Canada offers nothing he needs, mocking our military, threatening annexation, JD Vance is right behind him, nodding like he's watching his favorite movie.
And Jivani, he's not condemning it, he's not pushing back, and he's not defending Canada. He's pitching himself as a middleman.
Imagine thinking the way to protect Canada is to cozy up to the people who are actually attacking it.
It's naive at best and dangerous at worst. Because you can't negotiate with someone who doesn't respect you. And JD Vance does not respect Canada.
So when Jivani says that he can leverage that friendship to help, I hear something very different. I hear a politician who sees his future tied to American power, not Canadian democracy.
And that's why we keep saying this. Jamil Jivani is dangerous, not because he's loud, but because he's not. He's polished, he's calm, he's well-spoken. He doesn't rant like Poilievre. He sounds reasonable while pushing a worldview that is anything but.
Exactly. He's the Trojan Horse Canadians need to watch out for. Because he presents himself like the nice conservative, the polite campus speaker, the friendly MP, the guy who says, oh, my Turning Point tour is the Canadian version. We're more polite up here.
Listen, Jamil, there's no polite version of what you're doing. There is no Canadian remix of recruiting young people into a far-right Christian nationalist project. You don't get to slap a maple leaf on an American extremism model and pretend it's harmless.
And the thing is, he's good at it. He speaks better than Poilievre. He connects better than Poilievre. He comes across as thoughtful, even while working to dismantle everything that keeps this country functioning.
And people underestimate that. They see competence and assume compassion. They see eloquence and assume empathy. But the votes tell us exactly what he believes. No school meals, no equity programs, no foreign aid, no public responsibility.
And that brings us right back to the source material, Yale Law School. Because people have asked, how did he end up aligned with JD Vance? Simple. They learned politics in the same incubator.
Yeah, Yale Law is basically Hogwarts for future power brokers, except instead of learning spells, you learn how to run for office, dismantle systems, and shape ideology. Same robes, same ego, worse outcomes.
And look, Jivani wasn't born into wealth. He climbed. And getting into Yale is genuinely impressive.
Absolutely. But once he got there, he didn't just study law. He plugged into one of the most powerful conservative networks on the planet. JD Vance, Peter Thiel's circles, the intellectual machinery behind the modern hard right movement.
This wasn't, oh, we happen to be in the same class. Yale Law isn't a school, it's an ecosystem. It shapes you, it recruits you, and it launches you.
And in Jivani's case, it launched him into a worldview that now shows up in every corner of his political identity. Every vote he casts, every program he opposes, every campus tour he organizes, every reference he makes to restoring society.
And here's the uncomfortable truth. Once someone gets forged in that world, the world of Vance, Thiel, and turning point thinking, Canada First will never ever be their instinct. It's not how they were trained.
His political DNA is American conservative ideology with a Canadian passport. There is no Canada First instinct, only the Canadian version of a movement that sees our social programs as weakness and our diversity as a flaw.
All right, for anyone watching who still thinks Jamil Jivani has your back, let's talk directly to you for a second. Especially the guys under 25 who are angry that they're not making what a 60-year-old makes after 4 decades of experience.
Okay, but I do get the frustration. You're entering the toughest job market in decades. Housing is impossible and wages are flat, while everything costs more.
But instead of helping you navigate that reality, Jivani feeds your anger and hands you a pep talk straight from the influencer gym locker room. Nothing about solutions, just a steady diet of rage, blame, and imaginary enemies.
He tells you your real enemy is diversity programs, or women, or immigrants, or government feeding hungry kids. Anything except the people actually holding the power and the money.
And that's the tell, right? If you really cared about young men who can't afford a future, you'd be going after the actual roadblocks. You'd be talking about breaking up the monopolies that price gouge us. You'd be talking about stopping the tech bros from buying up housing stock. You'd be talking about massive infrastructure investment to create real high-paying jobs.
Exactly. Real populism punches up at the people hoarding the wealth. Jivani's version punches down at the people trying to claw their way out of poverty. He ignores the billionaires and attacks the safety net.
So let's do something Jivani would never do. Look at what he actually does for you when he is in a position to make decisions.
And the first choice he makes again and again is to vote against supports that help people who struggle the most.
Take school food programs. Most Canadians hear kids should have meals and go, yes, obviously. Not Jivani.
Nope. He talks about these programs like they're some kind of moral failing instead of the thing that helps kids actually learn. Teachers see the difference instantly. Better focus, better attendance, and fewer meltdowns.
But in his world, helping kids eat crosses a philosophical line. Suddenly feeding children becomes an argument about discipline and toughness.
And I'm sorry, but if your worldview can't handle a hungry 8-year-old getting a muffin and a yogurt, maybe your worldview is the problem.
But Jivani's worldview, it can't handle that. Because the second you admit a social program works, suddenly you admit government can't actually do something useful.
And that ruins the whole tough love conservative brand he's been building. The brand that says, if you need help, the government shouldn't be the one giving it, even if you're 8 years old.
And this is important. Jivani isn't just against school food programs because of the cost. He's against them because of the philosophy. He literally put out a video saying, the government shouldn't be your daddy.
Government shouldn't be your daddy? Tell that to the single mom working 2 jobs who just wants her kids to have a warm lunch. It's the same script JD Vance uses. Everything becomes a test of moral character, even a sandwich.
But there's a reason that he does it. If you convince people that needing help is a weakness, then you'd never have to fund the programs that actually help them. It's the oldest trick in conservative politics. Tell everyone the building's on fire, then ask them to trust you with the fire hose.
Meanwhile, the reality is he's not trying to shrink government. He's trying to redirect it away from social programs and towards policing, punishment, and religious identity.
So now let's dig into something that gets thrown around a lot in Jivani's world. This idea of liberal racism. Because he talks about that differently from DEI, even though he bundles the two together when it suits him.
When he attacks DEI, that's about programs, hiring practices, representation, anti-discrimination tools, fairness in workplaces. Actual policies designed to open doors for people who've been locked out.
But when he says liberal racism, well, that's a whole different creature. That's him claiming that the government itself is racist for acknowledging inequality and trying to fix it.
He's not fighting racism. He's fighting the idea that racism exists. He treats any attempt to address inequality as discrimination against someone else.
It's the same rhetorical flip you see in American hard-right politics. Don't solve the problem, redefine the problem so that the solution becomes the villain.
And here's the wild part. He frames efforts to help marginalized people as unfair, but has nothing to say about the inequality that made those efforts necessary in the first place.
In his worldview, DEI is a symptom and liberal racism is the alleged disease. This belief that government policies create division by recognizing identity at all.
And let's be honest, pretending everyone starts from the same place is not equality, it's fantasy. It's political convenience dressed up as fairness.
And it plays out beautifully with the bro culture crowd that he's actually courting. The guys who think someone else is getting a fair shot is the reason they're not CEO at 22.
He's feeding that resentment, not with solutions and not with real economic policy, but with the idea that they're being replaced by programs that simply ask for basic fairness.
And meanwhile, the same young men he's riling up, well, he votes against the things that would actually help him.
Now, this is a good time to talk about those campus tours aimed at those young men. These aren't harmless speaking gigs. They're political recruitment events modeled directly after the Turning Point strategy. It's built on the idea that universities are hostile towards conservative students.
So create a story where universities are run by liberal elites who hate you, then offer yourself as a leader who'll help students push back.
It's clever, because once you convince young people that the institution around them is rigged, you can funnel them into your movement, not through debate, but through identity.
Now, let's get into the religion part, because this is where the danger really becomes crystal clear.
And we're not talking about faith. Faith is personal. Faith is fine. This is about turning Christianity into a political identity, a marker of who deserves power and who doesn't.
And Jivani has been leaning harder and harder into that message. Christians are under threat. Christians are being pushed out. Christians need political protection.
Which is nonsense. Christians in Canada enjoy full rights, full freedom, full participation. Nobody is coming for their beliefs.
But Christian nationalism is about saying that one religion should shape laws, values, and the identity of a country.
And this is where the JD Vance connection matters.
Yeah, because JD Vance is one of the leading architects of Christian national politics in America. And he has openly said that he wants to reshape society around his religious worldview.
So when Jivani calls him a friend and says he could help, that is not comforting. Canada doesn't need help from a man who thinks pluralism is a mistake and minority rights are optional.
And when you turn religion into a political identity, a badge you use to gain power, that's when things get really dangerous. Because once you define your group as the chosen one under attack, anything becomes justified in the name of defending it.
Now, speaking of that, let's move to foreign aid because this one tells you everything about his worldview.
Jivani's position on this is simple. Don't help anyone outside Canada. He consistently votes against funding foreign aid measures via the budget and speaks out against the principle of it. Which sounds tough until you remember what foreign aid actually does. It prevents famine, it stabilizes fragile countries, it reduces mass displacement, it avoids wars before they even start.
Cutting foreign aid doesn't save money. It creates bigger, more expensive crises later through refugee crisis, security issues, economic stability.
But here's why he opposes it. Foreign aid is compassion in policy form. It's the belief that we should help people even when they're not in our voting district. That's not part of his ideology.
He doesn't care if communities collapse abroad because his politics only recognize suffering when it's politically useful.
The people affected don't vote here. They don't matter in his calculus. That's the part that I can't get past. It's always easier to cut help from people who can't fight back.
And when you put this all together, the votes, the tours, the religious messaging, the foreign aid stance, the JD Vance connection, the pattern is impossible to ignore.
It's not random. It's intentional. It's a worldview that says support makes people weak. Inequality isn't real, identity is a weapon, and compassion should be rationed.
And that's exactly why all of this matters. Not because of one person, but because of where his direction leads if nobody pays attention.
This isn't just politics. These decisions affect actual families, actual communities, actual countries.
And if this is the future of the Conservative Party, Canadians deserve to know what comes with it.
And that brings us to the final billion-dollar question. Is Jamil Jivani just a loyal soldier for Pierre Poilievre, or is he auditioning to replace him?
Well, I think the answer is obvious. Pierre Poilievre is the battering ram. He's loud, he's aggressive, he breaks down the door. But Jamil Jivani, he's the architect who walks in afterwards to redesign the house.
Exactly. Poilievre is playing the role of the angry populace, but Jivani is playing the long game. He's younger, he's smarter, he's more connected to the global hard-right movement than Poilievre will ever be.
If Poilievre stumbles, if the anger burns out, Jivani is standing right there, ready to offer the same extreme policies, but with a calmer voice and a Yale degree.
And that is why every Canadian needs to know what this man stands for now. Don't wait until he's running for leader. Look at the pattern today, because he isn't just rising, he's waiting.
And if you want to stay ahead of the curve, you need to follow us on Substack. We just made Rising Stars in Politics. So come see what deep dives look like over there.
Grab your merch below, and if you want to help us keep doing this work, hit the join button to become part of the A-Team.
Like, subscribe, share this video with someone who needs to wake up, and we will see you tomorrow.
Thanks for watching. Ciao for now.